Marcus had always been the kind of man who minded his own business. He kept his lawn trimmed, paid his HOA fees on time, waved to his neighbors, and didn't involve himself in petty drama. His house, tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac, was supposed to be his sanctuary after long shifts at work. But for nearly half a year, one neighbor had been quietly chipping away at that peace, in the form of a silver SUV that seemed to think his driveway was a public parking lot. The first time it happened, Marcus thought little of it. He'd returned home on a Saturday afternoon after visiting his sister, only to see the SUV neatly backed into his driveway, as if it belonged there. The sun was bright, the neighborhood quiet, and he assumed maybe someone had confused his home with a friend's. He waited for a knock at the door, an apology, or maybe even a note, but none came. By evening, the car was still there. Eventually, around 9 p.m., Marcus heard the distant sound of an engine starting, and through his window, he saw a woman he vaguely recognized from the block casually walking to the car, getting in, and driving away without so much as a wave. That woman was Karen. Karen wasn't just any neighbor, she was on the HOA board. People in the neighborhood knew her reputation. She was the type to hand out citations for unmowed grass while her own flower beds were overgrown, the type to call the city about a trash can being left out too long, yet leave hers out for days. She was always right in her own mind, and if she decided something was acceptable, that was the end of the discussion. The second time it happened, Marcus went out to speak to her directly. It was a weekday evening, and he'd just come back from work. Her SUV was in the exact same spot, blocking his access to his garage. He knocked on her door. Karen opened it with that tight, neighborly smile people use when they're pretending to be polite. "Hi, Karen, I think you've parked in my driveway again," Marcus said evenly. "Oh, don't worry about it," she replied breezily. "I just needed to unload some groceries and didn't feel like walking too far. I'll move it in a bit." He tried to keep his voice calm. "It's just that I can't get into my garage when you park there. If you could use your own driveway, I'd appreciate it." Karen's smile stiffened slightly, but she nodded and said, "Sure, sure." Just for a little while. She closed the door, and the SUV remained there for nearly 2 more hours before she finally moved it. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. The silver SUV would appear. Marcus would either knock on her door or leave a polite note under the windshield, and eventually, it would disappear. But the messages never seemed to sink in. It was as though Karen believed his property was a convenient overflow lot for her own use. Neighbors began to notice. One elderly couple across the street shook their heads when they saw it. "That woman's got nerve," they muttered to Marcus one afternoon. Another neighbor suggested calling the HOA, but Marcus knew Karen was the HOA, or at least part of it. If he complained formally, she might just twist the situation to make him look unreasonable. Months dragged on, and Marcus's patience was thinning. It wasn't just the inconvenience, it was the principle. Every time her SUV sat there, it was a silent statement: your boundaries don't matter. Your property doesn't matter. One chilly Thursday evening in early spring, Marcus returned from a long day at work, his mind on dinner and a warm shower. He turned onto his street, and his heart sank. There it was again. The silver SUV, backed in perfectly, as though she were mocking him. This time, he didn't bother knocking. He didn't leave a note. He didn't even pause to think. He pulled out his phone, searched for the number of a local tow company, and within 20 minutes, the low rumble of a diesel engine broke the quiet of the street. The tow truck backed into position, its amber lights flashing against the houses. The driver, a bearded man in a reflective jacket, hopped out and looked at Marcus. "This the one?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "Yep, been happening for months." The driver chuckled knowingly. "We get calls like this all the time. Some people just don't get it until it costs them." With practiced efficiency, the driver hooked up the SUV, tightened the straps, and winched it onto the flatbed. Marcus stood at his window, sipping coffee and feeling a deep, satisfying sense of justice as the truck rolled away, taking the silver SUV with it. He thought, that's the end of that. Surely, the towing fee and the inconvenience would drive the message home. For about a week, it seemed to work. No SUV, no uninvited parking. Marcus allowed himself to relax. But then, the following Friday evening, as he drove home from work, he saw it again. the same silver SUV, parked in his driveway as if nothing had happened. Marcus stared at it for a long moment, his jaw tightening. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was pure defiance. Without even stepping out of his car, he made the same call to the tow company. The driver, amused to see the same vehicle again, wasted no time hauling it away. This time, Marcus knew Karen wasn't going to take it quietly. Sure enough, less than an hour later, a loud, angry pounding rattled his front door. Each thump was sharp and rapid, like she was trying to break the wood. Marcus took a slow breath, set his coffee cup on the table, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, he could see Karen, her face red, her hair a little disheveled, eyes blazing. He opened the door just a few inches, enough to make his point. She wasn't welcome to barge in. Marcus opened the door just a crack, leaning casually against the frame. "Evening, Karen," he said, his voice calm but edged with something colder. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Don't. Evening. Me," she snapped. "Where's my car?" Marcus didn't flinch. "If you're talking about the one that's been blocking my driveway for months, I believe it's on its way to the impound lot." Her jaw dropped. "You towed it." Again, she stepped closer, her tone rising, her finger jabbing toward him. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "Oh, I'm well aware," Marcus replied evenly. "You're the neighbor who's been treating my property like it's her personal parking spot. And you've been ignoring every polite request to stop." Karen gave a humorless laugh, almost as if she couldn't believe she was being challenged. "This is harassment. You can't just tow someone's car because you're in a bad mood." "I didn't tow it because I was in a bad mood," Marcus said, crossing his arms. "I towed it because it was illegally parked on private property. My property." Karen's voice took on that smug, law-meeting tone, the one neighbors knew well. "I'm on the HOA board, Marcus. I know the bylaws. I know the rules around here. You can't just..." Marcus cut her off. "The HOA doesn't own my driveway. And the bylaws don't give you a pass to park wherever you feel like. This isn't about the rules you think you control. This is about basic respect, which you've been ignoring for months." Her face flushed a deeper shade of red, and her voice dropped to a hiss. "You're making a huge mistake. I could make things difficult for you." For the first time, Marcus stepped forward slightly, closing the gap between them. "Karen, you've already been making things difficult for me. Every time I come home and see your SUV sitting there, I'm reminded that you think my boundaries don't matter. And the more you push, the more you're going to find out that I don't play your games." Karen's glare could have burned holes through concrete. "This isn't over," she spat, turning sharply on her heel and marching down the walkway toward her house. Marcus closed the door, locking it with a deliberate click. He wasn't sure what kind of retaliation she had in mind, but one thing was certain: she'd finally been forced to deal with the consequences of her entitlement. For a few days, the street was eerily quiet. Marcus noticed her SUV was nowhere to be seen. He figured she was either embarrassed or trying to cool off before making her next move. But on the fourth day, an envelope appeared in his mailbox, with no stamp and no return address. Inside was a typed letter, the kind that dripped with false professionalism. Marcus read it twice, smirking. She was clearly trying to scare him with official-sounding nonsense. But he knew the HOA had no authority over his private driveway, and no right to fine him for enforcing his property rights. Instead of responding, Marcus took the letter, folded it neatly, and slid it into a folder labeled, "Karen, Evidence." He had a feeling he might need it later. A week later, the inevitable happened. The silver SUV reappeared. This time, Marcus wasn't even angry. He was ready. He took a few pictures, wide shots showing the car in his driveway, close-ups of the license plate, and even a short video of the date and time on his phone. Then he called the tow company. The same driver as before showed up, shaking his head with disbelief. "You weren't kidding about her being stubborn," he said. "Some people have to learn the hard way," Marcus replied. Once again, the SUV was hauled away, its tires squealing slightly as it left the incline of his driveway. Marcus didn't have to wait long for the fallout. Less than 30 minutes later, Karen was at his door again, but this time, she wasn't alone. A man in a navy blue jacket stood behind her, arms crossed. Marcus recognized him as Dave, the HOA president. Karen wasted no time. Marcus, this is harassment and it needs to stop right now. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Because last I checked, having your car towed from private property isn't harassment, it's the consequence of ignoring repeated requests to stay off my driveway. Dave stepped forward, trying to take a more diplomatic tone. Look, Marcus, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe we can work this out without all this towing business. It's causing tension in the neighborhood. There's no misunderstanding, Marcus said firmly. My driveway is mine. It's not overflow parking for anyone. I've told Karen this more than once. The fact that she's on the HOA board doesn't give her special privileges here. Karen crossed her arms, muttering, "You're making this way bigger than it needs to be." Marcus locked eyes with her. No, Karen, you made it bigger when you decided my requests didn't matter. When you decided your convenience was more important than my rights. Dave glanced between them, realizing he wasn't going to talk Marcus into backing down. All right, well, I guess this is something you two will need to resolve directly. But just try to keep the peace, okay? Marcus gave a small nod, but his gaze never left Karen's. I'm always peaceful, until someone forces me not to be. After they left, the SUV never returned to his driveway again. Whether it was the towing fees, the embarrassment, or the realization that Marcus wasn't bluffing, Karen seemed to finally get the message. She still sent him the occasional frosty glare at HOA meetings, but Marcus could live with that. The rest of the neighbors, however, seemed quietly pleased with how things had turned out. A few even admitted to Marcus privately that they'd been on the receiving end of Karen's arrogance before, and they were glad someone had finally stood up to her. Marcus never wanted a fight, but he knew one thing for certain: sometimes, the only way to deal with people who don't respect boundaries is to draw a line and refuse to let them cross it. And if that line happens to be painted across your driveway, well, they'd better think twice before parking there.